What's up, y'all? DT2 Comics Chat here. You're going to love this interview. I want to introduce you to my colleague, my co-podcaster, my brother in arms, my friend, out here talking about his new comic world. Please welcome David Nemesis Howard. What up, Nems?
Hey, what's going on? Been a while since I talked to you in person. We're always chatting behind the scenes, but always love to see your beautiful face over there. So yeah, man, I am excited to talk about this. And not only that, it's not just my world. There are a number of very talented creators who are jumping on behind the scenes with this thing and are going to be bringing stuff, including one DT2 Comic Chat. So, it is a growing thing.
Awesome. Okay, we're definitely going to touch on that before we go. First off, though, for those that don't know you, I want you to tell our audience a little bit about you, your background, where you come from, all that.
Sure. So I live here in Southern California. This is the quick biography. I'm married. I have 3 adult children now, which is an incredibly weird thing to say. But originally I was getting out of high school. I graduated from West Point. I was an Army officer. And then got out of that, and I was an IT guy. I got the real job. So I did computer stuff, and I worked in any number of industries. I worked as a defense contractor, banking, medical. I wrote AI and computer stuff, and all sorts of stuff. Did that, and but that grind, man, that killed me. Especially I was commuting to LA, and but I've always wanted to write. I've wanted to write since I was a kid. I started reading early, got into it from my grandmother and my mom, and writing was always one of those things I put down. What do you want to be as a kid? Writer was always on there. And I was writing stuff very young. I wrote my first horror story at 9, and entered it to be doing something. And then after that, I got into writing as a hobby. And I always thought of it as a hobby because it's like, it's like that thing when it's like, what do you want to be? I want to be a rock star. It's like, oh, well, your chances of being and doing that seemed to be so remote, So let me fix my camera here. I keep slipping down. There we go. All right. So yeah. But my wife, and I got to give full credit to my wife. She's one of those people that is always like, follow your dreams and encouraging me to do this stuff. And I would write stuff and throw it away. And then eventually she was just like tired of it. She was like, look, you are a writer. You need to get out and do it. And at that time, I was also lucky to be surrounded by a bunch of wonderful people outside of my home who were encouraging me to do it as well, to include yourself. But there are Almega, Hades, Jeff Bracey, Steve Sellers, all sorts of people like, go take the plunge and do it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And it ended up in a novel. I wrote my first horror novel, The Long Game, which is turning into a series of novels that I'm going to write. Comic books for ASAP Imagination. I've got the Op6 series. And then from there, I was like, look, I want to write my own comic series as well. And I had this universe that I wanted to turn into a novel called BloodWorld, the BloodWorld universe. And I started sharing it behind the scenes with these guys from this podcast you may know, Sloppy Spoilers. Mm-hmm. And you guys were like, this is fantastic. I was like, tell us more. And the more we got to talking, I was like, I don't have time for another novel series right now, but this really sounds like a comic book series, a series of comic books in this universe. And that was and it went forward from there. And I had come up with this whole world and the history and the way the technology works and everything. And you guys were enthusiastic about it. And so here we are years later. I mean, I first thought of the concept for BloodWorld all the way back in like 2005. And it was just kind of sitting back there in my mind. And now we have our first comic book in the series, in the universe, is drawn. We got plans for more coming up. It's exciting. I mean, the whole comic book is done. I've got physical copies that I'm looking at over there. And we're going to make this thing happen. And it is incredibly, incredibly exciting. And it's something brand new. And I think that people, once they get it in their hands and read it, are going to love it. So that's where we are now. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, you kind of already answered my next question, but what was the exact moment that you knew you wanted to make comic books? You alluded to your grandmother and your friends, but what was it that clicked inside of you that said, you know what? I need to make me some comics?
I didn't realize it at the time, doing these interviews, it's weird because you start to think about things from your past that kind of like buried. When I was a little kid, like I said, I read all the time and I was always writing stories. But there was this kid that my mom babysat after school, and him and his brother. His name was Derek Ramos. I would love to know what that guy's doing now. But this guy had this unique style. We were the same age. And this was when I was like from 9 to we're about 12, we hung out. And this guy drew these figures that were more than stick figures. They almost looked like Legos on paper. And I would sit there, we would sit there for hours at the table with long row of butcher paper on the table, right? That's all we could afford was butcher paper, you know? And he had crayons and pencils or whatever. And I would tell stories. I'd be like, yeah, then the guy did this and the guy did that. And this guy flew up there and there's an explosion. And he's drawing everything I'm telling him on the butcher paper. I wish I still had them. And there would be these huge, long stories in butcher paper that he would draw. And we just sit there for hours. I'm telling just ad-libbing stories, and he's drawing them as we go. And, you know, eventually, as life is, you know, we kind of drifted apart, and that's the way it worked. But looking back on it now, it was the first time I told comic stories and worked with an artist who was doing this stuff. And it's amazing to think about that now, you know, so that all happened. And then I kind of got into writing plays and short stories. And then I also wanted to write novels and stuff like that. But I was still reading comics. But the first time that I thought that I really wanted to write a comic book, because even though I enjoy my capes and cows and stuff, I'm like, and could write that, I think. When I read Hellblazer for the first time, and then I read Sandman, and then I saw what they were doing with Batman in the early 90s, and then Spawn came along, I started to see that everything, even in a superhero universe, didn't have to be Batman or Superman or Flash. Not that there's anything wrong with them. That's not what I'm saying. But that you could have stuff in there, mystical elements, magic, even horror. And then you could have science fiction. Judge Dredd came along in 2000 AD. And I was like, whoa, wow. Oh, wow. Comics can be more, you know, this graphical format can be more than that. And not only that, we could tell any story we want. We don't have to tell stories for kids. You know, here I was thinking that I was delaying childhood by being into comics. And to a certain extent you are, but at the same time, it's like, I can tell serious stories this way. And then that was right around the time, I have to say also, that another one of my loves, D&D, there was this company called Devil's Due Publishing that's since gone out of business. But they partnered with D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, and bought all of these great novels that I had been reading to life as graphic novels. And I was like, wow, look at this. Look at what they're doing over here. And they brought Conan. They did Conan for a while until it went to Dark Horse, and then it's come back to Marvel. And I think now Titan has picked it up. But there are all these stories coming back, and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. So I'm like, they're doing high fantasy and pulling no punches here, and they're doing it in graphic format, and it's fantastic. So it was like, suddenly it was like, okay, you can tell stories by writing a novel, but you can tell those same stories doing it in comics, and I loved it. So
I think you brought out something very important that's normally glossed over. Normally when we say comic book, we think superheroes, but actually there's no genre that hasn't been translated and or included into a comic book format. And the format is wide open to whatever kind of stories you like, whatever kind of stories you want to read and what you want to tell. Of course, some things have fallen in and out of fashion as things do in culture, but there's no limits, absolutely no limits to what you can create a comic from. And I think that more of us creators need to talk about that, you know, when we say comic books, we don't just mean superheroes, because I too have some non-superhero based content, and I'm incredibly excited about it, but I'm like, this ain't capes and cows. I love me some capes and cows now, but there's more stuff to say. So here's my next question. What would you describe as some of your greatest challenges on your way to becoming a comic book content creator?
Well, I think one of the greatest challenges, and you're going to identify this one immediately, is finding an artist, just finding an artist, period. That's number one. Number two, finding one that you can have a good relationship with and collaborate with. And then three, finding a way to, when you write a comic script, and I think this is one of the things that when I started getting into writing the script, it's like you're trying to take what's out of your mind, like the Harry Potter thing where they pull the thing out of their mind with the wine, and you're trying to put that on paper so that the comic book writer can see what's in your mind. So,
Yes.
If you can't write and communicate clearly on paper, your artist is going to have a really hard time, really, really hard time. And you got to find someone who can understand what you're saying. And one of the artists that I've worked with, one of the greatest compliments I got is he told me that he loved reading my scripts because it felt like he was getting a short story every time written just for him, and that's kind of what it was. And so that is very enjoyable, but that's a challenge, because it's a different way of writing. The script format is different. And also, every person I think is individual. So it's like I had to find my voice in the script. So not only am I giving you the way I write the script, which tends to be very, I like to set scenes and then have narrative underneath it. And then I give you a Bible, which is background information to let you know all of the information you need as an artist to be able to create the entire picture. So I don't want to be micromanaging, but at the same time, I really want you to get my vision, and we're going to work together on this. So it's challenging, but I think it's so much fun because I love writing short stories anyway. And so here you are trying to figure out all of that, and then also doing. There's one other thing I have to add with the script is that you're figuring out. You have to visualize in your head how the page turns are going, how that's going to draw a reader in. So there's so much thought that goes into it. And I love when I talk to people who maybe have picked up a comic when they're a kid, but never looked at comics. And like, oh, that's easy to write a comic book. I was like, really? And then I start talking about it, so, and then they figure out that, because a lot of times they're like, what's a comic book writer? I mean, the people that are really doing stuff are the artists. And I would never, artists, colorists, inkers, letterers, they're all important to a comic, but so is the writer, so.
That's right. That's right. Well, you said a lot there. And, one of the things that jumped out at me was how words mean different things to different people. So sometimes you think you're being as clear as possible because it's as plain as day in your head. And then somebody else reads it and their interpretation is so completely different. And you've got to be able to have a meeting of the minds to translate what you're talking about. That's really, really key. And everybody has a different style. I've discovered in my process that there are some artists that just want you to write out the lines and leave them alone. I tend to be more of a movie director. I see it in my head because I'm an artist too. I just don't have time to draw everything that I write. So it's already kind of laid out in my head when I'm writing it out. So everybody's different. Okay, so go ahead.
The other thing I have to say is I love it when an artist surprises me too. I love it when they'll add some stuff in that I wasn't expecting. It's a little thing, but one of the first comics I wrote, it had a definite mood to it. It was creepy. It was eerie and scary. And the artist put some animals in it that had like these blank expressions and everything in the foreground. And I never wrote that. I'll admit it right now. I never wrote that. They're not necessarily evil animals, but the way he drew them and the way they framed the picture added to the ambiance of the panel. And I was like, this is fantastic, So it's just those little stuff like that.
Well, now you touched on it before, but let's go into a little bit more detail. You talked about kind of the genesis of BloodWorld, but I want to know what actually sparked the concept of BloodWorld.
I was watching, as I'm wont to do, a documentary. I love to watch documentaries of all different sorts. I was watching one on genetic engineering. And they were talking about all the different ways that people are looking to extend. This particular documentary is about extending human life, but they were talking about genetic engineering, pharmaceuticals. They're talking about transhumanism, and all of those topics are part of BloodWorld. But I'm watching this and I'm like, what is the world going to look like? What's the world going to look like when I'm a senior citizen? What's it going to look like when I'm dead and gone? And it just started to get me thinking, what if? And so originally, the first story I wanted to tell, and I'm still going to tell the story, was about one particular guy who's an operative, and he's something called a blood wraith. And they have the ability to, through technology and genetic engineering, to change their DNA real time to do a whole host of things. They can grow weapons, they could grow wings, they could change their appearance. But there's always a downside to that, is that they do genetic damage and eventually kill themselves. And so this is what I came up with. And that was the first thing that I drilled down on. And this is what I was going to write a novel about and stories. But to do that, then you need to build out everything around that to understand what world is this guy living in. So I came up with the Ganymede monarchy, who are their enemies. I came up with what life is like in there, and the towers, and what's it like to live in a society that's dominated by genetics and all that stuff. And then I said, well, how did they get from, because they all live on a moon around Saturn. I was like, well, how did they get here from Earth? Figured that out. And then I said, well, what is the history? And I started figuring that out and started writing all this down. But it all started with that documentary and me just saying, what if? And that's most of my stories. I sit there and I look at something that interests me, and then my mind just goes down the rabbit hole and I start saying, what if? And one thing builds on another. And pretty soon you've got, 500 years of history written, and you've written the technology, and you've built a universe for these people to live in. And you've come up with the enemy of that group called the Ganymede monarchy. And then my focus shifts there. And that's where this first comic takes place, is in the Ganymede monarchy. But, and then everybody else is coming in with new stuff as well. But it all goes down to just that one spark in your mind. And it was the same thing with the novel, The Long Game. I was watching the news one day, very dangerous. I don't recommend it. But I was watching the news one day, and these two people were yelling at each other about something. And I was like, if I sat there, I said, what if? I said, if the devil wanted to destroy us, he wouldn't do it in a big way. He'd get us to hate each other and kill each other. And from that spawned a novel. So, that's just the way that my particular creative process goes.
What are you most excited for your audience to discover about this first comic that you have out now?
I am so excited for them to come in and discover this world that is living and breathing, and in particular the Ganymede monarchy, because already people who have gotten to see the book, who have done interviews with me. I've given the book out to them to read digitally, or some people that I shared with. They're looking at it and they have questions. And that's what I love, because this society is fascinating. Yes, there's a story about a queen and her uncle and her cousin and a whole host of other things that are going on. But as the story goes on, this society is going to unfold, and you're going to be introduced to wider elements outside of the Ganymede monarchy, and you're going to be going, why? What is going on there? What are these people doing? Because, I could focus really on the characters, and I do, but what I really want people to focus on, because characters come and go, characters die. And in this universe, characters will die and go away, but what endures is humanity, and that's what BloodWorld is about. BloodWorld is about 500 years from now, humanity is still dealing with the same vices, the same greed, the same corruption, the same politics, and the same good stuff. People are aspirational. There's normal, everyday people trying to live their lives. But what does it look like now in my version of humanity's future 500 years from now?
So keying in off that, is there anything you can reveal about the tech That's exciting. Any tech you introduce that just blows you away to write about it?
Yeah, I will tell you this. So there are three different main factions here. You've got mutant kind left on Earth, and the Earth itself is mutated as well. And we're going to do stuff that deals with them. Then you've got people who are focused on genetic engineering as humanity's future. That's the Soul Scientific Symposium, and we're going to do stuff that focuses there as well. But then you have the Ganymede monarchy, which is focused on transhumanism. Transhumanism being this idea that humanity's future should be the fusing of technology and humanity. And so one of the coolest things here, you see it very early, is that having implants in your body or replacing parts of your body with technology for fashion or for utility is commonplace here. There's one scene, there's a battle early on in the comic where a guy is killed, not through a weapon. It looks like a taser. It functions like a taser, hits him from another soldier and uploads a virus, and he dies that way. He basically burns out, you know? And then there's another scene, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I'm not going to say who this is, where one guy has gone so far as his body that the only parts of his natural body he has left are his head and a thin glass cylinder, which contains his organs and allows him to pass waste out of it. And that's it. That's all he has left. So,
Wow.
you know, because when it boils right down to it, you know, this guy's made this decision for whatever reason, and you will find out eventually that that's all he needs, you know? So, and on top of that, then with the tech, you throw in monarchy and religion, and the new religion is a fusion of all of the world's religion and technology ruled over by a religious caste called the Ecclesiastes. And now you've got this struggle politically between the political power in the monarchy and the religious power in the Ecclesiastes who control this technology. And in a society where your whole life is about having this technology integrated into you, this starts to raise a lot of questions. So
Wow. That actually is incredible and quite fascinating. I was thinking about so many different elements, so many different Star Trek episodes, so many different sci-fi, staples, and so many different things. But how also there's the commonality of we're still fighting about the same stuff. 100 years from now, same stuff. We still got politics versus religion versus class warfare versus cultural warfare, and same stuff. But that's kind of the common thread of humanity, is that we have a hard time sharing the planet with people that are different from us. So, that's really, really good. Okay. Tell me this. Where do you see this going as you develop the BloodWorld, StoryWorld? Where do you see it going? Continuing with comic series, or do you have greater things in mind? Because I know you do.
Well, I want to continue the comic series. We've got plans for other series within the universe, which will be standalone at first because we want to build up these different elements, but eventually they would cross over. But, if you jump into Fellhand, which is coming, you jump into the Bloodlands, which is coming, you could read that standalone, and hopefully that leads you to other series because you want to know more about this other part of the universe. Then we are planning on publishing short stories and annotated collections of short stories, and I would even love to see novels in this. We want to do that. Once this gets going, I also want to do a comic book, like a magazine format, like 2000 AD. That's telling short stories in a graphic novel format and letting people explore. I would love for new creators to come in and be trying their hand at this, and doing stuff like that. And that's one thing. And then, beyond that, this universe, I think, lends itself to a lot of stuff outside of the actual storytelling, to things like RPGs. We already are doing plans to do some stuff with like fantasy or miniature tactical wargaming, because we've got people in mechs, we've got soldiers, we got warfare, we got a whole society devoted to warfare. Well, then you got to make a game where you can collect those things and fight the battles, right? on a squad level. So we're doing that. And then, one of the things about this business is you always have to be nimble. When people show interest in something, you have to be willing to go there. The back page of this comic includes a fake ad that I made up for something called Space Monkeys. Like used to have Sea Monkey ads on the back of the whole commentary.
Yeah,
So I
you're
did
going way back with that one, yeah.
yeah. So I did Space Monkeys as an ad coming out of S3 because they're genetic engineering. So they're genetic engineering these little guys that kids are collecting and fighting battles with their space monkeys. People loved the Space Monkeys. They absolutely loved it. They're like, I want Space Monkeys. So I'm like, okay. So we're working on a vinyl form Space Monkey set. We've got Space Monkey stickers that we're going to work on. And the artist I work with on an OPSEC, we're going to do an 8-page mini comic of Space Monkeys to see if people like it. Because it's full on Saturday morning cartoon stuff with cartoon violence with these little Space Monkeys. And we're going to see, hey, if people really love Space Monkeys, we'll give you some Space Monkeys straight out S3. We'll even brand it S3 Comics or something like that. So.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. Last thing I want to ask you is, this is a little bit of a broader question. What's your opinion on the indie comic scene in 2024 as you're entering things as a indie comics creator or having your own company or going forward with your own ideas? What is your perspective on how the indie comic scene has developed?
This is a dangerous question, but you know what? I'm not going to.
Yeah, we could do a whole pod just on that question, couldn't we?
There's a good and there's a bad. Well, you know what? I love to do these. I love to do podcasts where I go the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'll do the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, I think, is that you're all getting all sorts of voices with new stories that are coming out there and fresh ideas. And that's the biggest thing. People that are thinking and looking at things from a different way. I see people writing stuff that I think deserves to have a much wider following than it does. And, basically you've got, however many billion people we have on the planet now. And the whole comic scene is not being controlled by a few people in a few companies. Instead, you've got all these people coming up with the different ideas. Unfortunately, that kind of leads to the bad, where a lot of those ideas, I think, are dying on the vine because they're being starved of oxygen. And one of the bad parts of that is that I think you got a lot of people who were mainstream comics who have seen that indie is really hot right now, that the true comic reader, the true comic audience is in indie, and they're coming in. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, some of them are telling great stories, but I think it's kind of starving off the fresh flavor you had of people coming to the indie comics to a certain extent. I don't know. We'll see where that goes. The ugly, I have to say, and this is where I may cause some problem, but there's that saying in Dune that every revolution has within it the seed of its own destruction. Well, I think you're seeing that in indie comics right now. I mean, the infighting, gatekeeping, and just nastiness that's going on in indie comics is just out of control. It's out of control. And I'm not going to name names here because I just don't think it's necessary. But I'm watching people just going at each other, and none of it is about comics. Some of them are taking pot shots, but a lot of it is like people are getting arrested, people getting swatted, people calling this person that name and that person calling this person that name. I'm just like, I'm looking at here and looking at nukes getting lobbed over my head, and I'm just like, and the sad part is it's clickbait, it's rage bait for all these people. So suddenly, what was a thriving indie comic scene that was about featuring new voices and trying to build these new stories is suddenly all the oxygen, all that is being sucked out because people are just picking a side tribal wise and lobbing grenades at each other, So we were talking about, we're always fighting over the same things. Well, here it is. We had this indie comics movement, and now we're fighting the same things, and we're having the same fights. People, you're an SJW. Well, you're a racist. You're this. You're that. I'm like, oh man.
Right.
So, and I guess it's invariable. It's going to happen because people are people, which is basically what BloodWorld's about. But I wish it didn't. I just wish it didn't, because it's kind of ugly out there, and I refuse to get sucked into it. And the sad part is, part of me knows that if you picked a side and got into it, you'd alienate half the people who might buy your comic, but you might get more comic sales of the people who decide you're on their team until they turn on you eventually. So there's that.
No, that's a really good point, because I'm always team good stories. I'm not trying to get involved in all that periphery, because the only thing that's going to stand the test of time is good stories, just like good music. That's why we still do box music, Mozart, Beethoven, because it's incredible musical literature. And so when we talk about our favorite comic stories, we're always referencing Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, Dark Phoenix, Judas, Contract with Titans. I mean, because the great stories are still echoing forward 20 and 30 and sometimes 40 years later. So I'm team good stories. Everybody's got their opinion, and that's not going to change. And everybody's got their own perspective, and that's not going to change. So let's write some good stories. How about that?
Even stuff like, I saw somebody say the other day is like Wonder Woman is a minor character because she's never taken off. I was like, well, that's not true. When Wonder Woman was being written in the early 80s, they revamped that character. Why I'm blanking on the writer's name and the artist's name right now, but
you talking about Deodato?
No, George. Is it Lopez Martinez? No, I don't know. My brain is blank. It's early for me because I was up late last night working. But yeah, I mean, he redid. He brought a lot of the This guy brought a lot of the mythological elements into Diana, into the Amazons in the early 80s, and did all that. And he changed Diana's look. But it was one of those things where he brought something new to Diana without killing what was old and made her fresh. And for whatever reason, Wonder Woman may not have ever sold as well as Superman and Batman. But I think the people trying to, for whatever their purpose is, to downplay Diana as part of the Trinity of DC, I think you're barking up the wrong tree there, So.
Right. Well, I think you touched on one of the challenges in that area, and that is that, because I've tried to explain this to people before, no character can be all things to all people. And it's better when you give a character definition and just let the people like them that are going to like them, and let the people dislike them that are going to dislike them, because you can't make any one character all things to all people. And none of the major characters are that. And the more specific they are, the better chance you have of finding the audience for that character. Absolutely. But when it's, when you're trying to go for different appeal at different times with different groups as broad as possible, that dilutes kind of who and what they are. And I've seen that happen with a lot of characters, Wonder Woman being one of them. And once you dilute a character down, you kind of take the teeth out. And so, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah. So, but yeah, in the indie comics scene, it started out by people wanting to have creator-owned stuff and tell the stories you wanted to tell. And I say, let's stay with that. That was the right idea. That's a good idea. Let's stay with that. We don't have to degenerate into like you said, the ugly part.
Well, one of the things that I want to do with BloodWorld, I kind of hit on a little bit, but this is part of being indie, is that, and I hope people, I want us to be big, and grow and be successful. And I hope if we deviate from this, people will hold our feet to the fire on it. But, one of the things with the big two has been they have held on to those characters and brought them back to life all the time. And because we're telling a story about humanity here, well, one of the realities of being human is that you die, and as far as I know, only one person has come back to life from being dead, and beyond that, I don't see anybody in the blood world being the son of God, and if you don't believe in that, that's fine, but I do. But, so there will be main characters that you grow to love or to grow to hate. And when they're dead, they're dead. And the story moves on because the story of humanity moves on. History waits on no man or woman, so we're going to do that. So.
Well, you let our audience know it's going to be some Walking Dead stuff going on. You love them and then they're gone. Just tune up for it. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Nims. I really appreciate this. Happy to talk about BloodWorld and definitely, I'm a part of the mix, like you said, and I'm excited about just seeing you do it and just seeing you going forward. And I also agree that the story world you've created is vast, and it has many, many, many different pockets, much potential to tell different kinds of stories, and it's very, very fascinating. Also, what I find fascinating about your writing is the level of detail, because when you describe stuff, I can see it. I can see the stuff moving in my head, and that's really, really good. So I'm excited for my audience to tap into this as well, because I know they'll enjoy it. So thank you again for this interview. Thanks so much for your time. Let our audience know where they can find you on social media, and if you have a specific website for BloodWorld.
Yeah, so you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. I'm even on TikTok now, although I'm trying to learn that and navigate that. Facebook. All of them are the same, at Nemesis FC2. You can find me there. I'm working with YouTube to change it so that my YouTube channel will be the same thing as well, which makes it easier for everybody to find that. If you're looking for my personal website, go to dwhoward.com. Real simple. You can sign up for my email newsletter there. I'm going to be releasing sample chapters as I'm working on other writing. I'll tease other artwork as we get stuff like that. So we're going to get updates to that. Please go to Fund My Comic /Phoenix-Throne1 for the new comic campaign right now. And I'm working to add it to Kickstarter right now. So as soon as I'm done with that, I'm going back to creating something else, because as an indie creator, work's never finished. You're always doing something. You are everything. So you are the marketing, video, advertising, everything. So I'll be putting my hat on and doing that. So yeah, go in and look for that. Go check us out. Go support us. And then last, I got to say, we've been on a hiatus. Go watch Sloppy Spoilers. You can find the whole stuff. And when our schedules sync up, we're going to be doing that again. And Cinema Crusaders, great show. Love doing that show. So go check those out on the Comic Crusaders network. So I do a few things.
Awesome. All right. Well, for my audience, I'm going to put links to everything he mentioned down in the description box below, so you can click on it and check it out. Thank you again, Dave, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. See you guys later.